Kingston, Jamaica, 1950. July 15th. The world was about to witness the birth of a man they call the Cool Ruler. Born to parents Enid and Lester, with two brothers, Sylvester and Ruddy, they'd all start life poor, but rich with love. He'd father 12 children, fall in love with a local girl, get married and live the Jamaican dream. Then, with the world at his feet, he becomes addicted to drugs, serves a variety of custodial sentences, and things start to change. This is the story of Gregory Isaacs, born Gregory Anthony Isaacs, also known as the Cool Ruler of reggae. And for his sheer longevity in the business, some would say he was the godfather of reggae.
He is what I consider one of the few geniuses I've ever met in the reggae music business.
He had this aura, he had this ability to literally hold the audience in the palm of his hand.
He was probably one of the funniest geezers that I've met.
Gregory was just such a special individual and a one-off.
I'm Adrian Lester. For over 40 years, Gregory was not just a singer-songwriter. He was a friend to the people and always made time for the unfortunate, often sending money to charities without anybody else's knowledge. An intelligent man, Gregory loved to read and write and was an exceptional artist. He could draw and paint anything in fine detail. Gregory was also fun-spirited, loved children and had great comic timing, often spending hours laughing in the studio before he even sang a word. Within the music industry, he was universally loved, but his fans and the people of Jamaica loved him even more. Although he was internationally known for the hit Night Nurse, you're about to discover that there was more to Gregory than just one song. We begin our story with music journalist David Katz.
Gregory comes from one of the harshest and most disenfranchised parts of the ghettos of Kingston, Jamaica. He grew up mostly in Denham Town, I believe, which is one of those very peripheral spaces in Jamaican society, very much a have-not community. You know, the downtown Kingston area from the late 1940s was somewhere where there was a lot of sound system culture. These big, heavily amplified sets of sound system equipment and PA systems initially that were broadcasting music to the public. So there was a lot of music all around when Gregory Isaacs was growing up. Music was unescapable in that environment. And so obviously, you know, it took a hold on him from an early age.
American soul crooners such as Sam Cooke and Ben E. King were Gregory's inspiration, along with local Jamaican artists Alton Ellis and the Melodians. But it's said that his mother was his first vocal role model, as she would often sing around the house. Unfortunately, his father Lester would not play a major role in his life, as he abandoned the family when Gregory was just a young child. In the late 1960s, Gregory is in his later teens. After entering various singing competitions, Gregory finally gets the chance to record his first ever song, but maybe the title was not such a wise choice. It was called
Another Heartache, Another Heartbreak.
It certainly was another heartache, because the song failed to make a big impression. But Gregory knew the road to success could be long. It's at this time that Gregory is introduced to Prince Buster by Jim Brown, who was known as the notorious political enforcer.
It's good to be wise when you're young.
Music journalist David Katz.
Buster, of course, an icon of ska, which was Jamaica's first indigenous form of electric popular music. Buster moved into record production after having been involved in sound system. Gregory ended up recording for Buster with a song called Dancing Floor. And it's just basically, a song about being out on the dancing floor, trying to make an impact on the dancing floor, trying to woo a partner, essentially. And so that's kind of Gregory's very debut, his very beginning.
Come on once more, let's go on the floor. That's where we will be much closer. I know you're not willing, but this song seems thrilling on the dancing floor.
With the dawn of the new reggae style, harmony trios become the new thing, and Gregory joins the pack, forming the singing trio, the Concords. They go on to record a handful of tracks with producer Rupie Edwards, having a mild hit with the song Don't Let Me Suffer.
Don't let me suffer now, oh Lord.
With the confidence of his recent collaborations, Gregory suddenly realizes that doing this on his own might not be a bad idea.
The thing with Gregory is that he understood early that if you had any chance of succeeding in the Jamaican music industry, you had to be your own master. You had to really seek to gain control of your own destiny, and that meant forming his own record label. So I think there were some early failed attempts to release music. You had some material that surfaced on Blank Label, pre-release, what's known as pre-release in Jamaican music circles, records that never really came out with an actual label. But he was not able to generate sufficient sales with that. He didn't have a company behind him with any sort of infrastructure. It was just him and Earl Dunkley trying to make their way. So he did form the African Museum label, and he was also issuing his own self-produced work on that label. That was the label that he tried to start with Earl Dunkley. Dunkley said that he had to break away from Gregory because Gregory was too quarrelsome with their landlord of their premises. Because he was always getting in fights with the landlord, Earl Dunkley decided to move away and start his own Silver Ring label. So these were some of the sort of false starts early on in Gregory's career.
Broadcaster David Rodigan on Gregory's unique appeal.
I thought he was exemplary in his dress code. He, for me, was super, super cool. I felt that the term the cool ruler could not have been applied to anybody else apart from him. I have to say I was in awe of him for many, many years. He was a highly intelligent man, highly intelligent. Gregory Isaacs had an appeal to both men and women in a very big way. Women were enamored by him. They thought he was gorgeous, he was good looking, he was sexy, he had this charisma on stage, coming on with the roses and unbuttoning the jacket first, then the silk shirt down to the string vest, showing underneath the silk shirt, putting his hands on his hips, this very slow movement as he sung the songs, and women just absolutely screaming for more. I mean, he just had this phenomenal female fan base.
Gave her back the key to her front door, 'cause it seems she didn't care about me anymore.
But equally, men were just big, devoted fans of Gregory. Why? Because he had this super cool way of conducting himself, of behaving, of just being the cool ruler, Gregory. But he also had these amazing songs.
Although Gregory was self-financing his own music, he soon had a couple of hits in the bag. One of them was My Only Lover, credited as being one of the first ever lovers rock records.
People say that you're too young to be my lover. Oh yeah.
Robin Campbell of UB40.
Well, he's credited as making the first ever lovers rock record in the early 70s, 73, 74, something like that, My Only Lover. And I suppose that would be the first time I was really aware of him. He was the first, or probably the most successful at straddling both sides. You know, he did the lovers rock thing, but he also did the conscious or the political lyrics. And when he did The Border, you know, that was probably when I think a lot of people started taking more notice of him.
If I could reach the border, then I would step across. So please take me to the border. No matter what's the cost.
I mean, he was absolutely prolific recording artist. I don't know how many hundreds of albums he did. It was like, I don't know, if you look at it, it's like one a month or something he was putting out over his 40-year career, you know, and we struggled to do one every couple of years, you know.
During the 1970s, Gregory worked with some of Jamaica's top producers. But as his songwriting skills matured, Gregory addressed his ancestors' social injustice. He grew dreadlocks and committed to the Rastafarian faith. One such song was Mr. Cop, recorded with Lee Scratch Perry at the Black Ark studio. Dr. Dread is the founder of Ras Records and worked extensively with Gregory. He tells us the story behind some of the lyrics in the track.
Mr. Cop, where he talks about how people are just living their lives and the police need to just not get involved. He said, beef de marrow, marrow in a bone. What don't concern you, please leave it alone. So what he's really saying is, you know, the cow meat and bone that's being sold in the market, inside of the bone, there's the marrow. So, you know, just leave it alone. Let us live. So again, that's Gregory's sensitivity, and the time period where he recorded those songs was really when Gregory was living in downtown Kingston and, you know, feeling it and singing from his heart.
We're just licking a cup and said, cool down your temper, Mr. Cop, cool down.
By 1974, he began working with producer Alvin Ranglin. Together, they produced the Jamaican #1 single, Love Is Overdue. This was a particular favourite of broadcaster David Ruddigan's.
Love Is Overdue was a massive hit single for Gregory in 1974. It was produced by Alvin Ranglin, and I was absolutely obsessed with that record. I just thought it was the most amazing rhythm.
Now who's gonna hold and squeeze my tie?
I bought it in a record shop in Sheffield and I played it to death in my bedsit whilst working in a theatre company in the north of England. I just loved that song.
Another is the song Universal Tribulation, produced by Sly and Robbie, a personal favourite of music journalist David Katz.
This is such a dynamite track. You've got so many elements that just make it exceptional. You know, reggae music is speaking to something very specific, a very specific geographical location, but it has this global resonance. So that's what Gregory expresses in this song. This is a universal tribulation. He's speaking about his own personal pain that he experienced from the inequalities of Jamaican society and growing up in this ghetto, being a slave descendant that's been denied his basic human rights. And yet this chimes with audiences all over the world. And then at the same time, you know, the production of the record is so exceptional. And you've got these fantastic harmony vocals by Dennis Brown, members of the Heptones, and Junior Delgado.
Pains that I feel, oh Lord, grief to be real.
By the late 1970s, Gregory was one of the biggest reggae performers in the world. and was a regular on the touring routes through America and the UK, playing at festivals and concerts from Brazil, Switzerland, Peru, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, and many more. There were only two other reggae artists who could compete with Gregory at this time: the late Dennis Brown and Bob Marley. In the late 1970s, Gregory once again teams up with producer Alvin Ranglin, recording hits like My Number One and what is now considered a reggae classic, The Border. Gregory was on the threshold of global stardom. In 1978, he signed to the Virgin Records offshoot label Frontline Records, followed by an appearance by himself in the film Rockers, in which he performed one of his hits, Slave Master, a particular favorite of Jazzy B's from the group Soul to Soul.
I mean, there's so many, you know, but that's one of them that from my childhood days, I still play it now. From when I was like, 15, 16, I was rocking that tune and I still play it today.
Every time I hear the music and I make a dip, Master comes around and spank her with his whip.
I remember carrying hi-fi boxes in to blues dances as a kid where my brother used to play, birthday parties and stuff like that. And them tunes used to resonate, serious. With the red light in the corner, Gregory bubbling on the tannoy speakers. Those are great memories of artists like Gregory and the songs that he performed. Put me right back into that space and that time. And this is one of the beauties of music as well, it conjuring up all those memories.
In 1979, his new album titled Soon Forward, which was produced by the legendary hitmakers Sly and Robbie, failed to sell that well, even though this album is now considered a classic. Gregory's first collaboration with Sly and Robbie was the song Oh What a Feeling in 1977, one of the first records to become a hit for the Rhythm Twins.
Oh, what a feeling.
Broadcaster David Rodigan.
I always remember asking him, Oh What a Feeling. It was one of my favourite Gregory songs, and I remember I said to him, what made you write Oh What a Feeling? He said, Sufferer's Song, Saturday night working man's song. It describes the end of the week and everything that a Saturday night means to a working man. What a beautiful song, written for the people, and that's what he was able to do.
Say, oh, what a feeling.
In true Gregory style, he would continue to change record companies, releasing a string of successful singles under various labels. You could say Gregory had finally made his mark. It's now the early 1980s, and Gregory begins an extensive tour with his band, the Roots Radics.
Hey, girl, you seem to be lonely, and I'm a lonely lover, just a lonely man am I.
And it's around this time that he meets a pretty student girl called June Wyndham. She's studying at Shortwood Teachers College in Jamaica. June's only in her early 20s, so she can be forgiven for not knowing who Gregory is. But on meeting June, Gregory realizes she is the one. But June is not as convinced.
I met Gregory during my attendance at Shortwood Teachers College. I was actually on a break and I went downtown to shop. And I met this Rasta man. Not an ordinary Rasta man. He was nicely dressed, very smooth. And he started to ask me some questions. And he sounded quite bright as well, so I entertained him, actually. He asked me where I was from and what I'm doing. And I told him I was a student at Shortwood. He offered me a ride, which I bluntly refused. Anyway, he followed my bus. And when I got off the bus, I saw the same man I was speaking to right behind the bus. It was my girlfriend and myself, and we were scared, so we started to run. Anyway, because he knew where we were going, he came on campus. And because we were on safe grounds now, we said, all right, let us entertain him. And we started a conversation, and it started from there.
At this point, Gregory had not told June he already had children. But not just 1 or 2. Gregory had fathered 12 children.
I didn't get introduced to the kids till about 2 years after we met. I was introduced because I was still in college then. Later on now, I got to know the kids and his mom and all of that. And then he bought a huge house after that, and everyone came on board. We all lived together. Whenever I mention it, everybody's mouth is opened. That's what I get most times.
June never had children with Gregory. The children they raised in their home together with Gregory's mother were from his previous relationships, as Gregory was 9 years older than June. But if it seems like Gregory was not a supportive parent and was just burdening June with his commitments, then you may be surprised to know that Gregory was a great father.
He was quite a proper husband at home. Proper husband, proper dad. Nobody could be out without his knowledge. And when him come in at night time, he counted everybody, checked every room. They had to look spanking going out. Their hair had to be well groomed. Knowing who Gregory is, a dapper, everybody had to look good going out and fresh. I helped to get the kids together for school in the mornings, get them off. He was sometimes the one who transports them. He was very strict. Schoolwork, he emphasized. Homework, they had to do. They had their chores as well. And a normal day when he's in a good mood, very playful. He had time when the whole place pull up because hide and seek or Stucky or something. Another time, story time. He used to tell a lot of story just from his head.
Fast forward to 1983, and Gregory's about to break the hearts of most of his female fans by marrying his true love, June Wyndham. At the time, June was 24 and Gregory was 33.
I got married on the 1st of December 1983. My birthday is actually 28th of November. I was proposed to on my birthday. Yes, as a surprise. He wanted to get married that day on my birthday. I woke up the morning and he said, I have a surprise. And when he reached midday, I was wondering what he was talking about, because I didn't see a gift come, I didn't see nothing special. Until I hear him saying to me, June, go find a church. I said, for what? He said, here's the ring, we're going to get married. And then he insisted. And then we couldn't get a church that day. So 2 days after, which was the 1st of December, we tied the knot. Supposed to be a quiet wedding. When I came back home, there was such a crowd because Barry G, the famous Barry G, got a hold of what was happening and broadcasted it. And when I came back home from the wedding, my whole avenue was full of people. Good friends that were there sang for us and all of that. It was such a nice day.
As a newly married man, life is good for Gregory. Right now, he's married the woman of his dreams, and his music career is about to go global. Now this one, you might know.
Tell her try your best just to make it quick. Come attend to the sick. There must be something she can do. This heart is broken in two. Tell her it's a case of emergency. There's a patient by the name of Gregory.
Eventually, he signed with Island Records and released the track that would finally see him break through to a much wider audience. The song Night Nurse was the title track from an album which was released the year before he got married in 1982. Music journalist David Katz.
The recording of Night Nurse is the song that really boosts Gregory Isaacs into the international stratosphere, turns him into a pop star of sorts for a moment. right when he reaches this height of popularity, these are the first concrete signs of trouble when he ends up in General Penitentiary, the most notorious prison in Jamaica.
I'm Adrian Lester. You're listening to the godfather of reggae, the Gregory Isaacs story, here on BBC Radio 2. Still to come.
One of the saddest things about Gregory Isaacs, his use of crack cocaine for so many years.
He only really had himself to blame, I think. You know, his addictions.
He was quite open about the perils of hard drugs.
The way it decimated his voice in later years, I think that hurt so many of his fans. It certainly hurt me, because he had this magnificent voice.
We'd like to give you the chance to share your favourite Gregory Isaacs song. To do this, use the hashtag #GregoryIsaacsFaveSong on social media. Mine is Cool Down the Pace.
Jamaican reggae superstar Gregory Isaacs, better known to his fans as the Cool Ruler, is making a rare trip to Britain for 4 gigs. His arrival today is all the more surprising because he had to get special permission to leave Jamaica, where he's been under house arrest for almost a year on charges of possessing firearms. When he's finished the shows in London at the end of this month, he must go back to stand trial on June the 7th. His first stop when he got off the plane this afternoon were the Newsbeat studios, where we asked him about those firearms charges.
Well, it was a setup, you know. But I just wake up one morning and saw the cop came in, woke me up in the morning, soon in the morning, see they found guns, my premises, and took me to jail.
You said there weren't any guns there at all?
There weren't any guns. I haven't seen the guns ever yet.
What explanation do you have then for the police picking you up?
I don't have an explanation more than they charge me. That's all.
Went to a dance last Saturday night. I was feeling tipsy and the mood was right. Sight a little daughter and I step in the corner, 'cause I feel like dancing all night. But I said, cool down the pace for me, little woman. You're dubbing it too fast for me.
Around this time, Gregory was starting to behave oddly with his close friends. Dr. Dredd witnessed this behavior firsthand.
One of the saddest things about Gregory Isaacs was his use of crack cocaine for so many years.
Gregory's wife remembers this time vividly and tells us why it led to the breakdown of her marriage.
We had a perfect marriage until cocaine came on the scene. And it started right there. But after a while, it got unbearable. That's what caused the breakdown. We started living apart and things like that.
Robin Campbell of UB40.
He only really had himself to blame, I think. You know, his addictions, and he was unreliable. You know, I remember going to see a show in the 80s where he was hours late coming on. When he did come on, he did 20 minutes or something and left, you know, which was heartbreaking.
Dr. Dredd decided enough was enough. And with the help of Gregory's wife, June, he booked Gregory into a drug rehabilitation center.
He and his wife were in Washington, D.C., because that's where I was based, and he would hang around a lot. And they would move from hotel to hotel because, you know, when Gregory was smoking crack, you know, things got kind of whack. So anyway, I had arranged to get him to a rehab place called Hazleton up in Pennsylvania. They were familiar with how being a big star could, you know, lead to drug use. And I kind of understood why Gregory was so deep into the crack cocaine. And he agreed, and I was going to pay for it. And the day I arrived to take him, Gregory had been out all night. And he was like, Dr. Dredd, you get out of here. Don't you come near me. I'm not going nowhere. And it was really a sad moment for me because I thought maybe there had been a chance that he would get some treatment for his problem. And it just showed me that until that person themselves is ready to get, you know, treatment, there's nothing someone else can do.
Music journalist David Katz.
He was quite open about the perils of hard drugs. And he said to me quite openly, this is why I always tell people, don't trouble it, stay away from hard drugs. Basically, look what it did to me. Don't let it happen to you.
His friend and business colleague, Dr. Dredd, explains how Gregory's addiction to drugs became the only way he could work.
We were in the studio recording another track for one of my children's records. It was Deo, the song that Harry Belafonte made famous. And I mean, this is a very simple song. It's been sung by many, many artists. And Gregory was just off tune. He couldn't get it. He wasn't able to voice it. And I mean, I voiced a lot of tunes with Gregory. And I'm like, wow, man, this is simple. Gregory, went outside the studio and, did his thing. And he came back in and he just sang the song perfectly. And what was really sad for me is that it was then I realized that Gregory was an addict and that if he didn't have his stuff, he couldn't really function. His mouth and jaw used to move from side to side, and I always thought that's when he was really high, but it's actually when he didn't have his stuff, and that getting his stuff made him normal again. And I think that's really sad to see somebody you love when they get to that point. It was pretty tragic in my mind.
Work all night and drink a rum. Daylight come and me want go home. Stock banana till morning come. Daylight come and me want go home.
Although Gregory had started using drugs, he was still selling out concert halls and festivals around the globe. One such festival was the legendary Reggae Sunsplash.
I was tired of the jailhouse, but the jailhouse wasn't tired of me. Yeah!
Singer and musician Maxi Priest played at that festival and shares his personal story about the 1985 Reggae Sunsplash at Crystal Palace Football Club in London. Gregory gave an iconic performance that day, but there's also a story about why Gregory went on earlier than he was billed.
At the time we did Sunsplash, I can remember my whole world, my whole life was focused on that show. And the amount of people, to see the stadium so packed. I can remember coming to the gig and the whole streets were blocked and it was a traffic for us to kind of get through, a traffic of people. And then when we got there, and then obviously when we did the show, it was just an amazing experience. But then after I did my show, obviously I sat back to watch everybody else. And I can remember Gregory and Sugar was debating on who should go on first.
Broadcaster David Rodigan.
Sugar Minott was incredibly popular at the time. He really was on a big high. And Sugar Minott had come after Gregory, so to speak. He was this newer kid on the block, and Gregory was, Gregory. And I'll never forget that afternoon, and Junior Lincoln from Sunsplash in Jamaica will back this story up, that Sugar Minott decided he wanted a higher fee before he would perform. He felt that his fee that had been agreed with Sunsplash Synergy in Jamaica wasn't appropriate for the numbers of people in the park, and he wanted to renegotiate. And Junior Lincoln and the Sunsplash management from Jamaica said to him, no, we've made an agreement, we've signed a contract, this is the fee. So Sugar Minott said, well, I don't want to go on now, then I'm not going on. And I'll never forget it, because I was told, Sugar Minott doesn't want to go on. And Gregory was billed above Sugar Minott. So we had to negotiate the idea of Gregory coming on earlier in the billing. That's not good. In other words, Sugar is not going on, and if he does go on, he'll go on later. So is Gregory prepared to take a step down? So I approached Gregory, and I said to him, Gregory, I know you're billed to appear later because you're Gregory, but we have a situation here, and I would really be most grateful if you would consider going on earlier because Sugar Minott, there's a situation here. And Gregory smiled and said, all right, I'll do it. And Gregory Isaacs went on and he ripped Selhurst Park into shreds. He absolutely mashed it up. He had the audience in the palm of his hand. Sugar Minott had to come on then after him because Sugar realised, well, if I don't perform, there's all sorts of legal complications and my fans are here. But here's the story that I subsequently heard, that it was Gregory Isaacs who'd encouraged Sugar Minott take that stance.
Singer and musician, Maxi Priest.
For me, my experience of Gregory, that's an ongoing saga. Gregory is doing a recording. Gregory has been known to do half of a song and then turn around and say, the food want more fertilizer. As if to say, the 10 pound or whatever pounds it was had to grow, immediately. And when I say that now, you have to kind of also remember the climate at that time too. It was different. There was a lot of guys that didn't really have proper guidance from anybody experienced in the business. So they would have to take on these one and two little things that were dropped around to be able to kind of create their own little business.
Gregory continued to perform at various concerts, and when he left his recording contract with Island Records, he built a strong relationship with producer Gussie Clarke from the Music Works label. They put together the 1985 album Private Beach Party, and one of his biggest hits with Gussie was the 1988 song Rumours from the album Red Rose for Gregory.
Rumors them spreading, claim that I've sense in me planting, but I'm a noddy dandy juggling. I feel rumors of one.
Although Gregory would continue to make music through the late 1980s and early 1990s, his hits would be less frequent, as Gregory would continue using drugs, which resulted in a number of his teeth falling out, which many people say affected the sound of his voice. At the time, a young Vincent Knapp was a roadie for the group Aswad and used to tour with Gregory. He told us how he felt the drugs changed his songwriting and delivery.
I didn't think it changed his music, but it kind of changed his direction a little. This is personal. This is my personal thought. But I thought it changed his musical thought slightly. I don't think the songs was as good. In terms of his writing and his delivery. Even his stage show suffered. We started to hear the nasal sound. I mean, he's always nasal anyway, but you could begin to hear it a lot more where it sounded like he was more singing from his head rather than his stomach.
Broadcaster David Rodigan.
The music business is littered with people who suffered at the hands of hard drugs, suffered cruelly. And I think more than anything else, it was the way it decimated his voice in later years. I think that hurt so many of his fans. It certainly hurt me. Because he had this magnificent voice, and the drugs took their toll on the vocal cords. There's no two ways about it.
Now who is gonna pay the consequence? Who is on the wrong side of the fence?
In 1995, Gregory signed with the Acid Jazz record label and things were looking good again. He'd recorded a new album called Private Lesson and sang one of the tracks on the popular TV music program Later with Jools Holland.
I'm in a the one I love has took the last flight.
Once again, we were reminded of Gregory's excellence. He was back with a great album and looking really good. But were the lyrics to this new album telling us a deeper story? As we know, Gregory always wrote songs about his life. Musically, things were on the up for Gregory, because in 1997 he's nominated for his first ever Grammy Award for the album Mr. Cool. Then, in the same year, the Rhythm Twins Sly and Robbie collaborated with the British soul group Simply Red to re-record one of Gregory's hit songs, Night Nurse.
Tell her try your best just to make it quick. Woman, tend to the sick.
In 1998, music journalist David Katz met Gregory for the first time at a concert in Jamaica. What he witnessed that day is one of his most significant memories of Gregory.
The first time I actually met Gregory Isaacs face to face was in 1998, and which was really a showcase for the veteran Jamaican performers that were still active. At one point, I made my way backstage to speak with some of the artists, and I saw Gregory Isaacs, and he was sort of slumped in a corner. He looked in a very bad physical state, and he was sort of very shabbily dressed in a kind of a white string vest with his belly kind of sticking out a little bit and a lot of chest hair visible. And I would say, you know, he looked really mashed up. He looked like he was a past it has-been. And I noticed that all the other performers were really giving him a wide berth. No one was going and interacting with him, and he seemed to be something of a pariah. Yet, at the end of the night, there he was on stage, immaculately dressed, completely transformed in a custom-made suit and a sort of a black fedora hat. He just looked like $1 million. And when he opened his mouth to sing, it was jaw-dropping. He was so on form for the rest of the night. And, you know, he performed for over an hour, and he never missed a note.
So far, come turn me on. You told me that you're so far, come turn me on.
Edwina Piert is studying for a PhD on Gregory Isaacs at Goldsmiths University in London. You could say she's a super fan, but one of her reasons for choosing to study Gregory is because she believes he's played a pivotal role for the reggae fraternity.
Gregory's music provides a space in which community is celebrated and expanded, and it does this through great production. In terms of Gregory, his particular stage and recording studio presence, he's recognised for his unique take and sound. Also, his closeness to the people he's performing to, the view of the world that is encapsulated in his songs. One respondent said really poignantly that whenever a Gregory record was played, he was guaranteed to get a dance. And so this is not just a theoretical exploration of love, but a tangible experience of it.
When you get voting out of none.
Jazzy B, the original Funky Dread with the group Soul to Soul, worked with Gregory in the late 1990s and thinks Gregory could have had another career as a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, we spent long hours with literally the funniest man who, when you could decipher what he was saying, was even more hysterical. I remember the tape operator leading him into the studios, and for some reason Gregory had taken a left rather than a right and ended up in the broom cupboard. And for anybody who knows Gregory Isaacs, the whole night was about that left turn, and it was just so incredible. I mean, we must have done at least, 5 or 6 hours just like having a laugh and that, and literally half an hour voicing and doing whatever we initially came there to do. he was the cool ruler. It was so bizarre, and it would be switching from one sort of vibe to the next. But hanging out with him, we literally were in stitches all the time, and I've got great and fond memories of him.
Producers Mafia and Fluxy share their stories about Gregory's comic timing.
I told him to write a book because I think he's the most hilarious person I've ever met in my life.
He's just funny, we was on the plane traveling, we was going to Jamaica with him, and just simple things like you said to the air hostess, give this man some porridge.
And you got the poor British Airways hostess saying, I don't know what you mean, sir. We done a festival with him during his sickness, and I'm not sure if it was Switzerland, but anyway, it was in Europe. When we got there, they lost all his clothes in transport. So someone had to go shopping for him in the morning to get him some clothes. And he wanted this felt hat, and they couldn't get it. So anyway, his friend got him a felt hat, and it was about 20 sizes too big. And he performed and he goes, did you see the hat? It was wobbling. The hat was way too big for him. But the funniest thing is he went on stage without it and just wore a normal cap. And the show was good, and he got a big encore. When he came on, he was wearing the felt what was too big for him, and the crowd just applauded him and went mad just to see him step back out in the hat.
So how do you produce an icon like Gregory Isaacs?
Do you know what? He was very directional. He had some good ideas.
Yeah, he put his input in.
He had a lot of good ideas.
We want the best out of him. So we have to put on the producer's hat properly, you know what I mean? And, there's certain parts he would do say it on a bad note, and we stopped the tape and said to Greg, let me hear it. Your ear's too clean.
And there was one time, this time we had our studio at our parents' house, and it was my birthday, and he was voicing on my birthday. And I said, Gregory, that part don't sound right. He goes, you can get anything you want, because it's your day today.
We had some really good times with Gregory.
After finishing the 1990s on a high, Gregory kicks off the new millennium in 2001 with yet another Grammy Award nomination. This time it's for the album Private and Confidential. As Gregory starts this new decade, he begins a friendship with a lady called Linda Johnson Smith, who lives in London, England. In 2003, she becomes his manager, organising his daily affairs, events and concerts.
Oh yes, I'm feeling confused.
The relationship blossoms, and Gregory would live with Linda from 2007. They'd share their lives together, and it seemed that life was finally starting to make sense for Gregory. In 2008, after some 40 years as a recording artist, Gregory releases a new album called Brand New Me, which gives Gregory his third Grammy Award nomination.
Just in case you lose, only yourself should be blamed.
In 2008, Gregory is diagnosed with cancer. But Gregory, being Gregory, soldiers on and dismisses his aches and pains, putting them down to arthritis. In the year 2010, Gregory puts out what would be his last album, Isaacs Meets Isaac, with Zimbabwean singer King Isaac. With Gregory not wanting people to treat him any differently, he carries on touring and promoting these albums across the world, keeping his diagnosis a secret, until one day, his poor health finally catches up with him. Broadcaster David Rodigan.
I saw him performing in 2010 at Sierra Nevada Music Festival. He had a brown suit on, he was immaculately dressed, as always. But he was struggling on stage and he wasn't able to complete all of the songs, and a lot of the time he was putting the mic out to the audience to complete the songs for him. And I learned afterwards that he'd had to be assisted to get onto the stage and off the stage. And then somebody said to me, he's being diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Gregory's final months with Linda.
We never believed that it would happen so quickly. One Saturday evening, he was in the bathroom and I heard a bang in the bathroom, and that was it. He'd had a stroke, and that was the start of it. It was sad. It was sad. Well, even up to the morning that he died, I got up at 7 o'clock. And then 10 o'clock, Tommy, his son, was with him. He said, something's wrong with Dad. So me and Norma, my friend Norma and Gregory's friend, we went in and we knew that was it. And I said to Sandra, his daughter, Sandra, you know, this is going to be it.
I was getting the information each day on how he was doing. I was in my bed that early morning when I got the news, really and truly. It was a really sad moment. I don't even like to remember that day.
He came to voice his last song for us. He said, I love you too so much, I'll come out in my pajamas to voice for you. We went outside and his friend was in the car and he called us in the car and we sat in the car with him. And after listening, I had to come out of the car, to be honest, because it was a bit emotional, because he was just talking about things we used to do and all that.
I regret to say I saw him just a few days before he died, and I actually wish I'd not. The illness, the sickness had just reduced him to nothing. And he was semi-conscious, you know, because he was under heavy doses of morphine.
You know, I can remember we're in the airport, you know, and he had all this popcorn all over him, and I just went over him and just brushed it all off, you know, and everybody else kind of looked at me like, "What are you doing?" But that's what he meant to me.
He was a very likable person. He was very down to earth. He did not have any kind of pretense or artifice. It was just what you see is what you get. This is who I am. He was also a very warm person with a good sense of humor.
I just really miss his humor and his laugh and the levity that he exhibited towards all people, and the love he showed all people. He is what I consider one of the few geniuses I've ever met in the reggae music business.
We've got fond memories, and it's nice to think of him in ways that we can all have little bits of memories about him.
But even now, it's like he's not even gone. His things are still there. I have a little mini museum with all his things around, same way. So it's just like he's on a long tour. You know what I'm saying?
Gregory Isaacs was born on July 15th, 1950. And on the 25th of October 2010, he passed away peacefully, aged 60, with his family in London, England. He died of lung cancer. Gregory received a Jamaican state funeral. After his death in the year 2011, Gregory is nominated for another Grammy Award for his last album, Isaacs Meets Isaac. Throughout Gregory's career, he was nominated for 4 Grammy Awards. Since his death, the Gregory Isaacs Foundation was set up to fund charities that Gregory supported across the globe, and regular concerts and initiatives are held each year to support these causes. In 2016, it was announced that the Jamaican government would posthumously award Gregory with an Order of Distinction, officer class, in recognition of his contribution to the country's music. A commemorative blue plaque was also installed at the house he used to live in with his family in London, England. The foundation is now working to get a statue of Gregory erected in Jamaica. Gregory Isaacs, a son, a brother, a father, a friend, a lover, a husband, and now a granddad. Always remembered and never forgotten, Gregory was the voice of the people, and his music and memory will live on. The reggae gates of heaven are well and truly swinging now.